Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on our programme this week, violent clashes between police and protesters in Tripoli. The residents of the northern Lebanese city are angry over a lockdown that has cut off livelihoods in a collapsing economy. The social and economic impacts of the global health crisis weigh heavily on Jordanians, prompting a rise in demand for cheap child labour. Plus, fashion, taboos and women empowerment. I'll be speaking to the editor-in-chief of Vogue Arabia, that's Manuel Arnaut, later in the programme. Now we start in Lebanon, where lockdown against the coronavirus came into effect on January the 11th. The strict measures have been piling hardship on the poor, which now make up over half of the country's population. In the northern city of Tripoli, protesters angered by lack of government aid took to the streets and they came with a message of hunger. Delano de Souza has more.
Out on the streets of Tripoli in defiance, protesters in the impoverished Lebanese city are frustrated with the lockdown measures in place. They argue the economic damage is too painful to bear. The economic crisis in the northern Sunni Muslim city has continued to worsen in recent years. It's now believed that over 3/4 of Tripoli's population is living below the poverty line. Residents say they've largely been ignored by the country's political class. Nevertheless, some politicians question the nature of the protests.
هذا أمر نحن بنرفضه بتاتا ونحن بنقول إنه هذه الأيدي اللي عبست ببلدية طرابلس ليست أيدي من الثوار ولا من فقراء المدينة، هي أيدي مدسوسة طبعاً لأنه ما حدا ببلدية طرابلس.
The lockdown in Lebanon is due to end on Monday. Up until now, the cash-strapped government has done little to help the impoverished cope. To make matters worse, the price of subsidized bread and flour has been raised for the 4th time in under a year.
Now, one country that has consistently claimed that it can bring stability to Lebanon is France. Emmanuel Macron has already visited Beirut twice since the city's devastating blast. However, that aid appears to have taken on a different shape. According to an investigation by Amnesty, Lebanese security forces have been using French-manufactured weapons against peaceful protesters in the crisis-plagued country. They include tear gas canisters, rubber bullets and armoured vehicles. Now, the UN's children agency UNICEF has been sounding the alarm on COVID-19 becoming a child rights crisis. This is particularly the case in Jordan, where poverty rates are soon estimated to increase to 27% among locals. As Peter O'Brien explains, this has led to high numbers of children entering the labour market.
With his father struggling to find work, Omar, aged 14, has had to step up to the plate. He repairs and cleans kerosene heaters for 3 dinars a day, around €3.50, to help pay his family's rent of 130 dinars a month.
Every day when I come back home, my hands smell of gas. I take a shower, have a meal, sit with my father, and then go to sleep. I work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. I work for 12 hours.
Because of the coronavirus, his school's been closed for almost a year. But that hasn't stopped him planning for a better future.
I don't want the pandemic to affect my studies. I want to finish them to become a pilot and make my dream come true.
UNICEF believes an increasing number of children in Jordan have been forced into work since the pandemic began, despite it being against the law to employ those under 16 years of age. It's also very difficult for the poorest families to access online classes, and often the parents don't have the education themselves to help.
We know that 1 in 4 children was not accessing the platform at the time. We also know that only 31% of all children have access to the internet. As you can well imagine, a family has to have money, credit, and it has to last the whole month. And it's one thing if you have 1 kid, it's another thing if you have 5 kids.
The latest government survey has the poverty rate in Jordan at nearly 16%. The World Bank has warned that in the short term, it could increase by 11 percentage points.
It's time for this week's guest, and I'm joined by Manuel Arnaut, who's one of the most influential figures in the world of fashion today. The 37-year-old is part of a roster of male editors of Vogue magazine, and he joins us from Dubai. Manuel, thank you so much for speaking to us on Middle East Matters. What makes Vogue Arabia different?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the perfect pronunciation of my name. It's not every day that it happens. Regarding what makes Vogue Arabia different compared to the other editions of Vogue, I think that we have a very important role in showcasing a different side of the Arab world. As you know, usually the news that come out of the Arab world are news of war and a lot of negativity. So we have this opportunity to show positive things about the Middle East, the amazing stories of empowerment, the incredible women that are part of the Arab society. And I think that's one of the most important roles of Vogue Arabia.
It's really important that you're focusing on the positives. That's certainly what we try and do here on Middle East Matters. And of course, it does go without saying, Manuel, that this is still a region that, as you mentioned, is very much embroiled in complexities, social restrictions, political sensitivities. How does someone like you, the editor-in-chief of Vogue Arabia, manage to find what we call a middle ground?
Well, first of all, with a lot of sensitivity, you know, it's important for us to really understand what's going on in the region. And my goal is not to produce a magazine that is overly shocking or that will push people away. So what we try to do is to create a magazine that makes sense in its context, that pushes people to think differently, but in the same way that it's respectful and that respects the local culture. So we try to do that by I have to say that it's not an easy balance sometimes, especially because traditional fashion magazines are super forward and are very outrageous. So we try to find a balance between that need of pushing the boundaries, but still to be respectful of the region and to celebrate the way that people live in the Arab world.
Now, Manuel, you've, of course, been at the helm of Vogue Arabia for 4 years now, and I'm going to ask you to do something that you may find a little challenging. Why don't you tell us about a few of your favorite covers?
That's actually a different thing to decide, but definitely one of my favorite covers. It's the cover of April 2019, where we spoke about the new rules of modesty, and we had a very provocative cover line, "Your body, your rules." Usually people associate modest women and veiled women to women that are to an extreme at home, that are abused by the husbands, and we wanted to show the different side of modesty, and that it's really like a personal choice of women, and we wanted to empower women that decide to wear the hijab. Also, I really love the cover from September 2020. Usually the September issue is our big fashion issue dedicated to trends, to what to buy, to the new season, and we decided globally as Vogue to do an issue more dedicated to hope. So that was the topic of the issue, and we wanted to do something more meaningful and closer to people's hearts. And so we found this girl that survived the explosions in Lebanon, and we thought that she would be the perfect poster girl for this idea of hope. And more recently, actually this month, for February 2021, we decided to ask 6 members from the ruling families of the Gulf to be together on the same cover to convey this idea of unity. It's very important for us to Vogue to be reporting on fashion and about trends and about beautiful things, but also what's going on in the Arab societies.
Manuel, you mentioned earlier that the Middle East is a region where boundaries are constantly being challenged, they're being pushed, and there are many designers who are certainly increasingly, they're inspired by social, cultural, political issues, and for my part, I actually have the pleasure of hosting some of them on Middle East Matters. I want to ask your feedback on them, and there is a little disclaimer. Some of these countries don't fall under the purview of Vogue Arabia. Does that sound okay to you?
That's okay. Fashion is universal.
Great. So let's start with Nadia Atik. She's a Yemeni-British designer whose sportswear collection brings together her love of her football club, Liverpool, and her religion, Islam. What do you think of her creations?
I think that it's fantastic. Fashion is exactly for that, to find solutions. So from what I know, this designer wanted to go to the stadiums and have the right apparel for a Muslim woman, and she decided to create her own line that kind of like answers to those needs. So I think that it's fantastic, and I think that she's a genius.
Genius, that's great. Up next, we have Araz Faza Ali, an Iranian designer who's actually drawing inspiration from the region's culture and heritage. Now, his latest collection, Manuel, presents a really unique, if you like, signature style of kaftans, and they're dedicated to Afro-Iranians, and they're also in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Are we inspired?
One of the things that I love about this brand is the fact that there's so much attention to crafts and to the traditional techniques. That's really important for me. But I do love also that this designer has a kind of like a social conscience, and that is connected with other phenomena like the Black Lives Matter phenomenon that was happening originally in the US and then extended to the entire world. So I think that it's also fantastic.
Wonderful. Lastly, we have the Muslin Brothers. It's an Israeli fashion line. It's designed to blur gender identity. So there's no women's wear or men's wear. Would you wear one of these outfits?
This is something that it's actually like a big trend, these genderless kind of designs, and it's also something that it's happening in other countries in the region. For instance, in the UAE, we have Mrs. Kipa that is also doing something similar. In Lebanon, we have the Boyfriend brand. So there are different labels that are starting to have these genderless collections. I think that fashion is about freedom, so people should wear whatever they want. So I support these brands.
Do you have a favorite?
If I have a favorite, no, I don't like to choose. Maybe a little bit of all. Why to choose one when you can have all?
Very diplomatic. Manuel, I'd love to continue, but we really have to end the interview there. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on Middle East Matters. And of course, as always, thank you so much for watching. Do stay tuned to France 24.